Hello, welcome to day 5 of Dancer from the Dance Festival of Irish Choreography. I'm John Scott, choreographer and artistic director of Irish Modern Dance Theatre. Tonight we're going to look at the work of Merce Cunningham. Merce Cunningham is a great American choreographer, but his father Clifford Cunningham was of Irish descent. Several Merce Cunningham works had Irish influences, particularly by James Joyce, including Sound Dance and most famously Roratorio, in collaboration with John Cage, which was based on Finnegan's Wake. Roratorio music was performed by great Irish musicians, including Mel Mercer, and Mel composes music for several of my works. So I first saw the Merce Cunningham Company in 1997 at Belfast Festival performing Ocean, and it completely blew me away. I subsequently began to develop a dialogue and friendship with the Cunningham Company, and I started to look at the work more frequently. I've had the honor of working with great Cunningham artists, including Cheryl Therrien, Ashley Shen, Daniel Squire, Derry Swan, Julie Cunningham, Cedric Andrieux, Matthew Moore, Daniel Madoff, Jean Freebury, and Thomas Cayley. Irish Modern Dance Theatre takes a lot of Cunningham class as our technique base. We perform 2 Merce Cunningham works, Totem Ancestor and Night Wandering. We're in discussion with Cunningham Trust about other plans for future work with this amazing genius choreographer. So now we are going to look at our performance of Totem Ancestor. Totem Ancestor was created by Merce Cunningham when he was still with Martha Graham Company in 1942. Music is by John Cage. In our performance, Totem Ancestor was taught by Daniel Madoff. The dancer is Ashley Shen, apprentice dancer Mufutau Yusuf, and prepared piano performed by Luc Weiss. This was recorded in the Abbey Theatre on the Peacock stage. Enjoy. And now we're going to see an interview by Patricia Lent, Director of Licensing at Merce Cunningham Trust, which was recently undertaken with me, where we discuss our work with the Merce Cunningham Trust and our performances of Night Wandering and Totem Ancestor, and we discuss future plans. This is going to be followed by a Mondays at Merce documentary on Roratorio, Merce Cunningham's great Finnegan's Wake masterpiece. Thank you.
I'm here with John Scott, the Artistic Director of Irish Modern Dance Theatre. During Merce Cunningham's centennial, your company presented 2 works that we are featuring on our repertory festival, our online repertory festival, Totem Ancestor and Night Wandering. Before we discuss those dances, can you tell us about your company and your work?
Well, it's great to be here talking with you, Trish. And I started my company as a young choreographer in Ireland in 1991. And it was initially to produce my own work. I needed a structure to produce my work, which I started to make. But in the course of my travels, I had worked with a company, Dublin City Ballet, that existed in Dublin in the 1980s. And I encountered a lot of wonderful people and a lot of wonderful things in my travels, which were mostly in Europe, but were often greatly influenced by American artists, American choreographers. And I decided when I started the company that it could also be a structure that could bring in other artists and have dialogues, because in Ireland, contemporary dance was very, very young. It was a very underrepresented art form. We had never had, for example, Merce Cunningham Company, Martha Graham, any of these companies who had performed all over Europe, all over the world. They never came to Ireland. We had almost no dance history of contemporary work. I started the company on tiny grant in 1991, and we gradually grew. And I started to invite choreographers to come and make work, which was a revelation. It was very interesting. I learned a lot. The dancers learned a lot, and it brought a whole other process. Because I remember when I was with Dublin City Ballet, the company used to buy repertory works. So someone would come and they would say, here's the step, count to 5, you do this with your hand, you do this on 7, and you were not part of a process. You were not part of a creative process. So I thought it was very important with my work that we brought choreographers who were kind of teaching alive with their own work processes, that we were all introduced to this. So that's how we approached inviting other choreographers to come and work. So with my own work, it's quite personal. It's virtuosic in a lot of different ways. I work with wonderful virtuosic, highly trained dancers, and I also work with other people who are maybe very interesting personas and are maybe inwardly virtuosic. I also work with older dancers. One of our dancers also includes the former Cunningham dancer Valda Setterfield, who has made 2 pieces with me. I've worked with refugees, asylum seekers who I have given workshops to, who I have found something that they are doing that is quite beautiful and unique, and I've integrated them into my work. But the bare bones of the work that I make is with wonderful virtuosic technical dancers. And there was something in Merce's work that always inspired me and excited me. I came across it late. And I found some wonderful correspondences and wonderful things in the work that were about things that I was trying to do, but he was like out there, and it really inspired me. So later, when the trust started, when Merce had passed on and the company had closed, and I was working with some Cunningham dancers already, we made contact with each other, and it just seemed the most natural fit that we bring some Merce work into the company and into the repertory and into the Irish consciousness, the Irish dance audience, the Irish cultural consciousness.
Great. So where did you first encounter Merce's work?
I first encountered Merce's work on TV. I saw some stuff on BBC. I think it may have been one of the Elliot Kaplan movies. And I remember seeing this other program, and it was Merce in rehearsal. This was sometime in the 80s. So I was part of this ballet company in Dublin, and we were doing our pliés and our tendus and all our ballet things and learning Coppelia and these kind of things. And then I saw this just stunning, wonderful work happening. It seemed 10 galaxies away from where I was. I later saw White Oak. The first live performance of a Cunningham piece I saw was White Oak in London in the mid-90s. And then I finally got to see the Cunningham Company in 1997. They came to Belfast Festival. And I had finally caught up with the Martha Graham Company, and I had seen it, and I had read about Martha Graham's work. I'd seen some stuff on TV, and I thought, I'm going to catch up with history. I want to see it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go to Belfast and I'm going to see the Cunningham Company. It's going to be great. It's going to be a historical experience. And I went to see Ocean. Yeah. And it completely blew me away. And I thought, this is not catching up with history. This is now. This is, it was so thrilling. And just before I saw Ocean, I paid a visit to New York, and there was a Robert Rauschenberg exhibition, the Guggenheim, and some of the stuff with the exhibition, there were these films with a talk with Patricia Brown, Robert Rauschenberg, Merce. So I was prepared for it slightly before, and I saw these old films, and the work was so passionate. There were always these sort of rumors that Cunningham repertory was dry, was like these tilts and balances, and everybody was vegan and macrobiotic and this kind of thing. And then I met the company in Belfast, and I ended up, there was this party for the company, and I went to the party. I got talking to Merce, and he was charming, enigmatic, but very, very open. Myself and another Irish choreographer asked him several questions. He answered every question.
Oh, how lovely.
He didn't volunteer any information, but he answered every question. And then I got talking to the dancers, and I was completely electrified by the work. And the following year, I was in New York. I had a bursary from the Irish Arts Council to attend Jacob's Pillow, and I was looking at the work of Meredith Monk, who is a big influence of mine in my work, and I performed with Meredith a little bit in some of her work. So I went to the Pillow, and Meredith was performing in one theater, and Cunningham were performing in the other. And I went every night, and then I was in New York for a couple of weeks, and I went to some events in the studio, and I got to see, so I saw the company outdoors at Lincoln Center. I saw them in the Pillow, in the Ted Shawn Theater, and then I saw them in the studio in this intimate setting. And it continually inspired and baffled and dazzled me.
So let's come forward to these projects that we're featuring on our festival. So the first work that you acquired was Totem Ancestor. It's a solo from 1942. Choreographed by Merce while he was still a member of the Martha Graham Dance Company, interestingly, since you've brought that up earlier. And I believe you first presented this solo at the Abbey Theatre. Is that correct?
Yes, we presented it in a mixed program of my work in 2014. It was in a program in the Abbey Theatre on the Peacock stage called Men in Motion. And we presented a famous duet of mine, Actions, in a mixed program, and we presented Totem Ancestor with a live pianist, Luke Vase, who had worked with John Cage. It was very, very exciting, particularly because Merce had made his Dublin debut in the Abbey Theatre, so it felt right that we were in the National Theatre. I love Merce's early, very quirky, strange work. My company also, we're not a huge company with a huge budget. So the smaller chamber works, the smaller pieces are very, very interesting to me. The duets, the solos, the trios, those things. And Ashley Shen, who had danced with Cunningham, was also working with me. And Ashley is the perfect person to dance Totem Ancestor. And the previous year we were performing in New York at La Mama, and Ashley was with the company. And I think you and we discussed about doing something. So Ashley and then a young apprentice, Mufatau Youssef, went to the studio and they learned Totem Ancestor from Daniel Madoff.
Yes, it was wonderful. It was a real convenience project. We kept finding these ways to piece it together.
Yes, it was wonderful. And so, we had these dreams of making this happen. And then as we started to execute the plans, the recession was happening. The Irish economy was tanking. Arts funding was being cut. But it's wonderful how you stayed with us and you were patient and very sympathetic and very understanding. And we found ways to make it work, that we could continue to mount the work and make these things happen.
Wonderful. So a year or so later, I think, is when you licensed Night Wandering.
Yes.
And this is a duet that Merce choreographed in 1958 for himself and Carolyn Brown. He was in Stockholm and had been invited to perform a program and was asked to choreograph something to Swedish contemporary music. And at the suggestion of David Tudor, he chose 3 piano pieces by Bo Nilsson. And the story is that he choreographed the duet in 3 days. What drew you to this particular duet?
It's got this coldness and this formality. Also, in Ireland, where we perform a lot, the stages are small. So the smaller chamber works are appealing. But it's so beautiful and it's so formal, yet it's so strange. And also, we were thinking of Ashley Shen and Cheryl Therian, and then also Kevin Coquillard, this wonderful French dancer who trained in the Conservatoire in Paris with Cheryl, and is now living in Ireland. And it was a great possibility for Kevin. He had this wonderful ambiguous presence, and he and Julie, when we started, we arranged, it was easier because Kevin at that time was half in Ireland, half in Paris. The Centre National de la Danse donated us the studios. Cheryl and Ashley were living in Paris. So we relocated to Paris to set the piece, and Jean Freebury came from New York to Paris, and we all got together in the Centre National de la Danse, and we had 3 couples. We had Cheryl Therian and Ashley Shen as couple 1. We had Julie Cunningham and Kevin Coquillard as another couple. And then we had 2 Irish dancers, apprentices, Mufataw Youssef, once again, who was studying in Seed in Austria, in Salzburg, and Deirdre Griffin, a young Irish dancer choreographer. So we had these 3 very different and very rich casts, and we worked. It was a very hard, very intense time in Paris. Jean is wonderful. I've always loved Jean as a dancer in Merce's work, and her energy and her presence. And she had a wonderful understanding of the nature of that work and of transmitting it. And it was very exciting. There was a very exciting feeling of kind of archaeology, even though there was a video that, as we were doing the piece, things would emerge and new questions, and it was really thrilling to see the piece suddenly emerge halfway through the first afternoon, when they all started that diagonal walk, that slow diagonal walk, with the man behind the woman's head like this, and we were tingling. It was very, very exciting. Yeah. And people who were in Paris came to watch the rehearsals. We did little showings at the end of the week, and it was a real special event. It was a quiet time during the summer, so there weren't so many people around, but that gave us the space we needed.
That's wonderful. Yeah, Jean came back just thrilled by the experience. It was her first experience staging Night Wandering, so there was that archaeology aspect to it when you're trying to figure out in real time what this duet is. So then we had a little trouble getting the project off the ground. We couldn't find dates, but then you managed some dates for the following year, and then I think you went back in the summer. But by this time, as I recall, Ashley was no longer available, so there was a little cast switching that went on.
Yes, so we met again in Paris. Kevin was still half Ireland, half Paris, so we had Kevin and Julie, and then we had Cheryl, and we made contact with Cédric Andrieux, and who Cheryl had danced with many times in the Cunningham company, and so it was wonderful to have Cédric in the studio with us, and very different partnering, very different coupling to Cheryl and Ashley, height-wise in many different ways. But it was very rich as well. And we worked for another week in Paris on that. And then we performed the works in December 2016 in Project Art Center in a double bill with a work of mine called Precious Metal. And we then came to New York to the 92nd Street Y, and Julie and Kevin performed. So in Dublin, we had throughout the week, Julie and Kevin performed the earlier part of the week, and then Cheryl and Cedric performed the later part of the week. And I think they each gave 3 performances. Wonderful. And it was beautiful. And we had people who came twice to see the 2 casts. And it was just gorgeous. And then going to perform it in Fridays at Noon at 92nd Street Y and Alistair Macaulay's program was also another wonderful way of showing the work and giving it more visibility.
And it's then, it's the performance at 92nd Street Y that we have on our festival, yes, our online festival, and that's Julie Cunningham and Kevin Coquillard. Yes. And this time, before you had been using a tape, a recording of David Tudor playing music, but for that performance, you had Adam Tendler play the Bo Nelson music, as I recall.
Yes, Adam is wonderful, and it was great working with a live musician. He found his own way with the music to match up with Kevin and Julie, and that was a beautiful partnership that we did in the 92nd Street Y, and then did again last year in Washington at Dance Place when we performed as part of the centenary.
Yes, and I was lucky to be there for that. I had never seen Night Wandering live before that performance at the 92nd Street Y. So that was the first time I'd ever seen the duet, and then I felt so fortunate that during the centennial, I got to see it again at Dance Place. We were sharing a program. We had made a min event for a group of young dancers in DC. So let's talk a little bit about Julie and Kevin in this duet, because they've really now had, maybe there haven't been a lot of performances, but there's been quite a duration of time, and they're both such...
Yes, it's almost 5 years now.
Yeah, they're such extraordinary and special performers. I wonder what you have seen as, the artistic director of the company, of the 2 of them with this duet.
We've talked about what sort of a couple is this? Are they a couple? It's almost, I know we all try not to impose narrative. We try not to see anything other than the movement in space and but there is something. I remember Julie saying maybe they're like a couple from hell or something. They don't necessarily look very happy, but Julie's, both of them, their precision, and they have this incredible inner correspondence that they, from the very first moment together when we started in Paris in 2015, and they started that diagonal, they just look like they've been doing it in eternity. They had they had such a connection, and with the lifts, with all those things, they don't even need to talk about them. It all just seems to happen. It happens
the way it's set up. The man is behind the woman for nearly the entire duet. So it's almost like she knows that he's there, but it's not, they don't face each other. And when I watched Kevin, who I had first met when I taught a class for Cheryl at the conservatoire when he was a very young dancer, he has this quality that he's listening to Julie, not her sound, but he's like just projecting awareness, and she's kind of leading him through this duet in some kind of mysterious way.
There's something of an old soul in him, and he and Julie have this wonderful matching. There's an ambiguity in their relationship. It's not. I often find when I look at a man and woman dancing together, I start putting that narrative of the man and woman dancing together. Is it romance? Is it something? But there's some other thing going on with them that is really interesting. And it, I don't know, it makes me look at the movement more. And the movement, the positioning, the choreography is really telling us something. And you get it all from that. They don't overplay with their faces. They don't do anything other than they're like these workers. They just they're executing a task. And there's a sense of a necessity with the two of them that they must do what they're doing. And they do it. And they're just unfolding this this very precise, very difficult, very beautiful, and in some way very painful task. And I just love the whole sense of ambiguity, and there's a sense of tragedy, and there's that sense of the Nordic Swedish winter in it. It's extraordinary.
Yeah,
they're very, very rich together on stage.
Yeah, I mean, Julie is one of the most stunning performers I've ever had the pleasure to watch, and whenever she's on stage, my eye goes to her. And what was intriguing to me about watching Night Wandering is that I felt that Kevin in the dance and me sitting in the audience, we were both attending to Julie there, and it didn't feel like I was ignoring him by being so drawn to what she was doing. It was quite it was an exceptional. I remember that day at the 92nd Street Y, that afternoon, watching that all unfold. It was quite something. So I can't end this conversation without indulging myself and asking you if you have any future plans, even if they're in the embryonic form, of presenting Merce Cunningham's work.
Well, my big dream, probably as an Irishman, in a way, what's possibly the most Irish piece of Merce's Roratorio. I have a great plan and a great ambition to realize Roratorio in whatever way is possible. Mel Mercer, who was one of the musicians with John Cage, with his father, Pather, Mel composes music for some of my work, and we have a great working relationship, a wonderful artistic partnership. And whenever, like this, we've been working together for years, and always sometime in the conversation, something about Merce and John would come up. And the whole Irishness of Roratorio, and the fact that it's never been able to find its way to Ireland. I know when Laura Uprachard was running Dublin Dance Festival and the Legacy Tour was happening, she tried to present it in her last Dublin Dance Festival. But dates, timing, budgets, it just conspired against it happening. And for me, and this is a funny thing, and maybe I should say it, I generally have this rule that I only invite choreographers to come and make an original work. I've turned down people bringing an assistant to set an existing repertory work. But with Merce's work, I felt because I knew Merce, I knew the company, so many of his dancers have worked with me, and I know all the people around that bringing Merce was not getting a secondhand work. There's something about the process of collaborating with the Cunningham Trust and of setting these wonderful pieces that is like it's an act of creation. It's a genuine creative act, and there's a dialogue. There's a whole artistic dialogue around it, and it's not put your hand here, put your leg there on that count, do that when you hear the bang in the music. It's a very real, rich thing, and it's my big dream to realize Roratorio in some way, and we are going to make this happen. I think you and I met for the first time actually in Enniskillen when we were doing a few excerpts of Roratorio to go along with the sound installation that was being done in the caves there. Yeah,
so
the happy days.
If we can do Roratorio in a cave in Northern Ireland, we can probably manage something.
Absolutely. And Mel and I talk about it at times too. And it's I don't know, it's something very special for Mel and for all those Irish musicians who were part of it, some of whom are not with us, but it's something that we have these conversations and meetings about every so often. So I think it's in the clouds and it's in the atmosphere, and we're going to find a way to make this happen.
Okay, well, I look forward to our next conversation about just this and other matters. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Trish. We really appreciate you supporting tonight's performance. If you would like to consider making a donation, we're going to show a QR code which you can access with your smartphone and make a donation to support the work of the artists for Dancer from the Dance Festival. Alternately, you can make a donation by going to irishmoderndancetheatre.com and clicking the donate button. Thank you so much.
Timing is very important, particularly in the way we work. How you say this, for example, this phrase took 15 seconds. How did it take that up? Is it fast here? Or so if we have tapes, that's something we can look for. Exactly what position, but really, I think a great deal of it has to do with trying to do exactly what it was, even though you know you can't. You're not only bringing back something that, say, you haven't done for a while, and you also have different dancers, maybe only one or two who were in that originally. And so these dances are different in size, and different in the way they do the movement, although through class and practice, you attempt to show them what you thought it was. And Robert Swinston does this in an extraordinary way. He's so precise about how something looked, as he has tapes and notes and so on. Even though when it comes back, it's on a different dancer, so there is something different about the phrasing. But there's different people. So I don't object to that. We attempt to bring it back as clearly as possible as to what it was or what we thought it was. We don't attempt to change it to fit. But at the same time, these are different people doing it, so it will have a different quality. Very often small things, not necessarily large things, but something, and I realize it's usually the dancer, he or she, who this is the way he or she would do that movement. I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that they don't do it exactly the way I did. If they have found a way that seems to me real, doing that, I don't object at all.
What makes something real?
It's when they do the movement beyond the perfect stage.
But it takes you a while to get there, and you're supposed to go next.
Oratorio was being created when I was an understudy. This was before there was a group. I was the only understudy. I can't remember if any of the piece had already been made when I came on board, but I was there for most of the building of it. Although I think that they continued to work on it on tour. So they were the very first steps that I watched Merce teach, and I stood up and learned the steps, the ones that the whole group learned. I learned from Merce. Because this work was made on a particular group of dancers, many of whom I knew, they were the company when I joined, and so I have a great amount of empathy and respect for them, and it's almost like I get a chance to dance with them again by watching them on tape for hours and hours. So I am trying to bring in some of their spirit and their tendencies and trying to get that, back in the movement. So if I remember the particular way that let's say Neil Greenberg would do his jig, then I try to not just make sure they're on the right foot, but that I have some information about the joy and the drive that he brought to that jig. And so that when I teach the steps to Rashawn, I want to make sure he's clear about what he has to do, but I also want to at least share that information, and then Rashawn can do what he wants, with that information. When I spoke to Merce about Roratorio in the year before he died, I mentioned that I had these different videotapes, and that some of the parts had been shared between Vicki Finlayson and me, and I wasn't sure in reconstructing it whether to reconstruct the sharing or to go back to the original parts, and I wanted to ask Merce about that. And I had a couple other questions about the dance, and he said, "Oh, I don't mind, whichever makes the most sense." And 6 and 7, and you finish the circle again, and 2 and 3, 4 and 5, 6, 7 and 8. So if you hyper-analyzed it, it goes side, and then it goes diagonal, and then it goes straight back, and then it goes diagonal, and then it crosses over, and then it goes diagonal, and then it goes front, and then it goes diagonal. Does that make sense? In Merce's notes, although I don't really see this on the tape, he said there was a stronger accent on the 1, 3, 5, and 7, which are the right steps. And we can try to put that in. So the accent is in the plie. It's the plie of those ones. And so I think there's still a plie when you step on the left, but maybe it's not quite as strong. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Does that make sense? It's the and of the one. It's like it goes step accent. He said strong plie with an accent.
When Merce said he wanted some objects for Roratorio, I went to the used bar, kitchen, whatever place that the Bowery used to be full of, and I didn't know what I was going to find, but I noticed one of those somewhere stuck in the back, and I thought, oh, that might do. That's interesting. That's kind of like a slight period piece. Looks kind of weird and corny, and Irish, I probably thought too, even. And I borrowed one from the store and brought it to Merce, and he said, "Oh, that'll do." And this, when the idea of reviving Roratorio came up, I didn't think any of those tools existed, and I thought, well, let's do something a bit jazzier. It's got a huge difference from so many pieces because of the nature of the music, which is, it really does sound like Irish jigs, and some of the dance is like that too, even though there's no specific relationship. And then there's John, who was then speaking over some elaborate sound system.
With an handsome little basket and some less. Page went out and recorded all sorts of sounds that are in some way mentioned throughout Finnegan's Wake. Dogs barking, children crying. I guess he went all over Ireland in order to record these sounds. And that kind of multiplicity seems to really be echoed in the choreography, with all of these life events kind of bubbling up to the surface and then just fading.
I think attention is something that you can do. You can stop this and turn and look at something else, that bowl over there, and concentrate on that. It's how you think. If you think you're being distracted, then you are. But if you turn and look and see something else, your attention goes to that.
It was so surprising when, in the middle of one activity, suddenly another activity sprouted up out of nowhere, and I would start, my attention would go there and continue with the original activity, and then yet another activity in another corner of the stage would come up, and it was very much, I mean, I remember Merce describing when I was a student, just this idea of the multiplicity of our experience of life. And I think at that time he used an example of walking down the street and walking by an open window, and there's a radio playing, and at the same time there's the traffic, and at the same time there's a person walking and a dog, and at the same time there are people walking on the intersecting street, and that all of these multiple events make up one's experience of life.
His palms make eyes triangle of coming powers, spectate javelin through his apricot eye.
Seeing the piece this past year in rehearsal here at the Cunningham studio as it was being put together, and then in performance in Los Angeles, because I was lucky enough to be in LA when they did the first performance of the revival of Oratorio, I was surprised at the scale of the work. These are people. This is definitely one of Merce's dances in which I see them as individuals, as I see social structures, I see interactions among people. For me, watching it as an audience member, it is such a human scale.
Is that jail, chorus, jail and outdoor, jail him and joy. He was sick, 7 dry summers, Joe faintly hitting the jukes by the properties His men showing participate, working the guns, he offers ejaculate all night, resemble the glowings of witching moon. From all directions of wind, raise the clouds of heaven's thoughts and Chinese jubilant claps and the movement beware. Now walking on the rock of this fugitive silence. As on the rider jumps to shoot still and all